Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod, where we amplify voices from across the industry. We aggregate those perspectives and elevate our collective thinking around strategy execution. I'm your host, Joe Mosier, and I appreciate you tuning in today. Now, today I want to share with you a recent conversation I had with Gray Montgomery and Katherine Sartian of DTN. DTN, as you all know, is a global data and technology company that provides hyper-local weather forecasting, market intelligence, and supply chain insights to farmers, agribusinesses, and ag retailers. Gray is the general manager of agriculture at DTN, and Katherine is a director of product management for ag. So I wanted to have them on the show to talk about the transformative work DTN is undertaking to deliver a digital intelligence solution through a one-screen strategy by looking at their legacy solutions, things like grain intelligence, grain discovery, farm intelligence, and wrapping it into an integrated tech stack called Ag Hub. Now, in this conversation, it was great learning about Ag Hub, what it'll do, and how it will serve our industry and market participants. But even more impactful for me was what the conversation tells us about the state of digitization, of intelligence, and of strategy within our industry. In the conversation, we talk about why DTN believes that we need something like Ag Hub, why it doesn't exist already, really how they believe it will accelerate the work that we do, but how it'll also change the way that we work in agribusiness. One thing I found particularly interesting is a discussion around how this differs from the tech we've seen historically that helped us manage transactions better, as this is more about how you make decisions. And at the end, we even get into a short discussion around whether solutions like Ag Hub risk further commoditization and margin destruction in our industry. The conversation that we have here is for those of us in the industry that are not tech leaders, but that understand that tech will have an outsized impact on who thrives amidst all the transformations our world generally and ag specifically is facing. Now, before we start, a quick reminder to like and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, and please consider leaving us a review to let us know how we're doing. It's the best way you can support the show. It doesn't cost you a thing, and you can do it right now. Thank you, as always, for joining in today. Here's my conversation with Katherine Sartian and Gray Montgomery of DTN. Gray and Katherine, thanks for joining us today on the Pacesetter Pod. I'm excited for this conversation. Let's go right at this at the start of the show today. What are you guys working on at DTN around the Ag Hub? What is it that you're building? Why are you building it? And what is it expected to do for both agribusiness and for the American producer?
Yeah, so we're in the midst of basically rebuilding just about everything in the DTN product stack. Legacy DTN Ag was a bunch of fairly unconnected products, things like ProfitX, DTN Satellite, IDTN, Grain Portal, and Farmer ID. Where we are going is a deep integration of that, and all with kind of the North Star of that we're seeking with Ag Hub to build a digital twin of agriculture focused on farm level supply and demand to inform how agribusinesses and farmers transact with each other.
And where was, in the previous iterations, the multiple different products, let's say, in that overall tech stack, is the unlock here truly the integration of all those multiple products and that data sharing across product types? Was there inefficiencies in the way those were built? Kind of, how is this the aggregation of all those different products and features? I guess, frankly, why is it something to be excited about?
Yeah, good question. So I would say that the unlock is a couple of things. One, if I'm a user, instead of touching DTN from multiple screens, now I'm touching DTN from one screen. So there is one screen for the upstream persona, the sales agronomist or their executive bosses. There's one screen if I'm a farmer, and there's one screen if I'm a downstream originator, merchandiser, or grain trader. And I guess kind of a 1B with that is that also there's much more focus on integrations to other non-DTN systems. So We're clear that, we're not going to replace everything. That's not our aspiration. But what we do need to do and what we aspire to do is to provide greater integrated intelligence. And so this one screen thing is not just DTN, consolidating its screens. It's also meaning that we are trying to do our part, do the best we can to get those other roles that we touch, the upstream persona, the farmer, and the downstream persona, to be able to draw intelligence from their other systems to inform the Ag Hub products. The second major unlock that, is admittedly at this point aspirational, but it is absolutely a North Star that we're seeking to go after, is that in doing that and providing that kind of integrated intelligence and providing those actual integrations into Ag Hub, we also recognize that how valuable data is and also how sensitive data is. And one of the things that, I've always been struck by since I joined DTN, or believed that was a great opportunity for DTN, and what made agriculture was one of the challenges I think agriculture faced versus other industry sectors I've been in over my career, is that there is a fundamental trust equation failure in agriculture as it relates to data. Before agriculture, I was in the food service space. And the food service, and I worked in the same kind of stuff where I was doing, market intelligence software services and things like that. And in that world, there were companies like IRI or Nielsen that provided basically benchmarking across those sectors. Agriculture doesn't really have that in a very meaningful manner. And the reason why it doesn't is because there's kind of a failed trust equation. If I'm a farmer, I'm skeptical of sharing my data through, some of the FMISs that exists, because I'm fearful that it's going to be used against me. That's going to be used to manipulate, whatever price that I might receive for seed or whatever, or, the price that ultimately I'm receiving from grain originators. If I'm an agribusiness, I'm also skeptical and worried about how my data might be also used against me. And so DTN sits in this position where I believe, because it's not owned by any ag business, that it can fill that void, that it actually can be truly a data escrow, a neutral arbiter. And that ultimately, one of the really big, hairy, audacious goals that we have is to build a data escrow in which we provide data rights management clarity to each of those personas, the upstream persona, the farmer, and the downstream persona, such that they can tell DTN, I will share this data with you, but on these terms, i.e. this is how you can reuse it. This is who you can share it with. Or this is how I am going to get value in return for that data. All that said, I know how hard that's going to be and how audacious of a goal is, but that is the second unlock. I state it second because it's the harder one. It's the one that we're further away from. But when you state when you, I guess, would ask where are we aspiring DTN to be? Or is it going to be 5 years from now? That is the vision.
Yeah, that's interesting. Katherine, from your perspective, where is maybe the original sin here, if you will? Gray pointed to some very real and frankly earned skepticism from the grower base, which then I think is, there's a transitional property there where then the agribusiness has also become a little bit skeptical around the usage of their data. So if we go back 10 years, really it's kind of interesting that this type of solution and capability doesn't already exist for ag, right? Great that you guys are working on it, but kind of a head scratcher. Why doesn't it exist? Was this a matter of we focused as an industry and as the innovators building products, we focused on the wrong things, meaning features over privacy and data management? Were we focusing on the wrong problems? Kind of as you've come into the industry, how would you characterize why we are now trying to work through this earned skepticism and resistance that Gray is pointing to?
I think that there's a few different reasons that really play into that. One of the ones is just the disconnected nature of agribusinesses. So you have all of these different businesses collecting all of these different data sets that really, there was not very much incentive to ever share data across those businesses. There's the perception that if this data gets shared with anyone else, it will erode our competitive advantages. So really need to figure out, well, what can we do to selectively share data? What can we do to aggregate data in ways that's meaningful and can give people insights, but doesn't necessarily erode all of the competitive advantages of others in the space? I think another is just the volume of agribusinesses that are out there. There's been a lot of different players in this space over time, which I think of kind of the example of like grain bin monitoring. If you wanted to really understand what's going on with grain bins in the US, there's so many different companies that do that monitoring. None of them really have full market share. So if you want to aggregate that all together and really understand it, there's not really a way of doing that. And I think the last piece is farmers play a very interesting role in this equation. At times, it feels like we've treated farmers almost more like consumers versus like small agribusinesses or even oftentimes large agribusinesses. But it feels like they're often treated like consumers instead of really treating them like B2B products. So in some ways, I think how that's played out is one, an eroding of trust. When I'm using a B2B product, I know that I'm likely paying for that product, but that means that like my data is going to be kept secure. I kind of know what the policies are and everything around that. If I'm using a B2C product, it's almost like I'm kind of the product myself. My data is what's going to be used. I think that at times we've kind of fallen into that trap of treating farmers more like they're consumers and like agribusiness farmer-facing products, treating them more like consumer products versus enabling farmers to really have that full control of their data and treating them with the same respect that we would a business of like, well, obviously you would expect in a B2B equation to not have your data really misused or shared. But I think that that's kind of not necessarily been the respect that's been given over time.
Yeah, that's an interesting sort of to overlap that. So I haven't heard that sort of characterization before, the B2B versus B2C, which that makes a lot of sense. But then also the fragmentation, so that almost prevents anybody from having enough of a network effect whereby, you know, the data that you put in, there's going to be enough value coming back out because everybody's sitting on that same platform or using that same service or in that same pool. Kind of to that, then Gray, you know, you talked about the Nielsen rating and lacking a Nielsen rating equivalent in this industry. Just for my benefit, and maybe for listeners that maybe haven't got there yet either, you know, I guess what's the illustrative use case or the benefit of a Nielsen rating equivalent within agriculture? And I'm thinking specifically for folks that are running the farmer-facing cooperatives or ag retailers, farmer-facing people. What is that going to look like, and why should they be sort of like saying, yeah, that's actually a meaningful gap that we can leverage to improve our business?
Yep. So one thing, I mean, just to kind of be clear on, when I use the Nielsen example, I mean, from my experience in the food service world, what that really meant is like Nielsen, like literally would like track how many like bags of Cheetos were sold in XYZ location in Chicago, Illinois on Tuesday.
Right.
And so, you know, you'd be able to at all times, if you like work for Cheetos, you'd be able to then, you know, kind of track changes in demand and kind of understand, you know, what were drivers of that. So we'll use the ag retail use case. You know, like right now, most ag retailers don't have like a full granular understanding of not only who they don't sell to, but also a lot of times don't even have a full understanding of like how big the operations are that they are selling to. And so we seek to be able to solve in that particular space, like kind of a bunch of questions. If I'm an ag retailer, and I'm working at the head shed, which sales territories are performing well? Where, you know, what are the top performing by market share and what are the underperforming by market share? Why is that? And then, you know, to that end, then you can identify, you can go down to the individual sales agronomist level and say, you know, you have 60% market share. If you have like 100 farmers, here's the 40 you're not selling to. And here's like a whole ton of information about them. what the size of their operation is, what they're planning, kind of what their rotation pattern is, even down to like what kinds of inputs they're likely using. So in that way, you can be able to show up and have an informed conversation when you arrive at the farm gate. Further, then the other way in which you grow your business is by improving wallet share. As I hear the story countless times that when the white pickup truck shows up and the sales agronomist asks, like, how big is your operation? The answer is like, well, I got about 1,000 acres. And then in reality, they got about 10,000 acres. And so this tool, helps provide, like kind of that clarity of like, what size of operation each individual farmer is working at. And so then that way, a sales agronomist is able to go in with, kind of clear understanding of what their share of wallet is with any individual farmer.
Yeah, thank you for that. Putting on a skeptic hat here, so bear with me as I kind of think about this out loud. The use case on the demand side, particularly for long chain trades and supply relationships, makes a lot of sense. So things that are outside my national trade territory, if I'm a co-op GM, a co-op merchandising manager, the things I don't have visibility to, because I just know what the bid-ask spread is within my normal trading lanes, my normal counterparties, the class ones that I'm served by. I've got a relatively narrow band of information. On the origination side, with my producers, I probably feel, rightly or wrongly, that I have pretty robust data, right? I've got my local CRM or ERP equivalent. We've got our grower list. We've got our historical information on their soil samples, their agronomy practices, what they've bought in the past, what they've produced in the past, etc. So what I'm thinking here is, okay, maybe I'm very quickly a buyer for the demand side of this solution, but I'm reluctant or less excited maybe to be a buyer on the supply side, because I feel like, okay, my supply is really, everything is tributary within 100 miles of my elevator, let's say, or 50 miles. I know these guys, no one knows them better than me. And we've got all these new AI tools, and my brother's son is looking for a co-op or internship, and he's studying tech at whatever school, and we're just going to bring this in-house. We're going to build something that helps us aggregate data and get better predictive capabilities on what's happening locally. So a question to both of you guys is, what's right or wrong about that line of thinking, and what might an agribusiness that's going down that road, what should they expect to experience if they're trying to build it in-house?
I think that there's a few challenges there's definitely pushbacks that have on that thinking, and a few challenges of building it in-house. I think the biggest one is you might have really good data about the farmers that but that completely ignores the farmers that you don't know. So one of the things that, being a DTN, that we really leverage in our products is that we do have data about 95% of farms in the US. That means that when customers come in and use our applications, they're really able to understand the full picture of what's going on in their area. So who are those farmers that they just don't have a relationship? Maybe they've heard of them before, but they really don't know much about their operations. It gives them that sense. How many acres do they have? Like you said, what are their soil types? All of that different type of information. What type of grain storage do they have? Really giving them that full picture. That's what we say when we're saying that we're creating a bit of a digital twin of agriculture, is like down to that farm level is how granular we try to get with that digital twin. I think a few other things I would push back on are, I think origination is becoming increasingly complex as well. Yes, you're potentially only sourcing within like 50 or 100 miles of your elevator, but at the same time, there's more and more factors that I think are playing into that, or that you can start to factor into it. So with AI, you can factor in things of like, what's going on with weather, what's going on beyond my 100-mile radius, like, are there pockets or corners of that where pricing is lower or higher based on supply and demand? What's going on with trade policies, biofuel regulations? All of this just means that I think like prices are increasingly volatile. So yes, the people you're sourcing from might remain consistent, but all of those decisions that go into what is the pricing going to be, when are you going to source from who, what are you going to be sourcing, all of that I think is increasingly complex. And it's so much data that like AI is really helpful at bringing that together and cutting through all of that noise to say, here's the 10 people that you should probably reach out to today. So I think it's potentially possible to do it in-house with your own information, but having that information beyond what you have today is what ends up making it really valuable.
I mean, you're effectively forfeiting the benefits of the network effect of, you said, all those people
Exactly.
you're not transacting with, or you have not transacted with for 5 growing seasons. You're basically locking in your disadvantage or your limited view of the local market. So
yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, we do get that pushback at times, which just basically goes along the lines of like, I've been in this region for 30, 40 years. I know my growers, and the reality is that first of all, they do agree, and oftentimes to a very good degree. Even the best, like say originators, actually still have a gap of roughly 10%. And so even if we're helping them on that 10%, that creates very real value. Secondly, I mean, and again, this is kind of maybe in the merchandising use case, but and to degree origination, but not everything exists within a draw area. I mean, there's going to be times when you're facing like basically a crunch, and you're going to have to go outside your draw area. And so at that point, then like the 90% like knowledge, is going to start to collapse to something like 30%. And so that's another critical use case that we can solve for. Third is that, in the grain trade, I mean, a key thing you do all the time is cross-country trades. And so even the biggest guys, like, basically have clusters where they, like, really own a territory. And then there's, some spaces where they really don't. And so when they'll say frequently to us, like, we're good. We got great data. And they'll say, well, do you do a cross-country trade, with say Eastern Colorado ever? And they'll like, yeah. And I'm like, and you have no footprint there. So what data are you relying on? Right. And the answer is not much of anything. And so we solve for that use case. And then finally, what I would note is that even though we're not really trying to sell ourselves actively in this way, I mean, there is a degree to which what we're offering to both the downstream side and the upstream side is something better than a CRM. And and so like when we go and to individual customers and show them basically what we have, the answer usually is like, wow, this like really unlocks like a lot of intelligence for us. But there's some examples like where our own data within our CRM or ERP is better than what you got. And we're like, great, let's integrate it. And then we'll run basically data models against that. And so it improves not only like their own grower data, and it puts their own grower data into one screen, but then it also makes the models for those growers that are outside of what doesn't exist in their CRM so much better. And so we're ultimately providing them some level like a CRM, but it's already pre-populated with data. They don't have to feed a CRM, go through the long, painful curve of loading a CRM with data. And furthermore, it's not only is it not like, a one-time a new set of data, but we're running continuous models that continuously update on factors such as like what is yield likely to come in at, what are changes in basically the brand preferences for individual farmers and factors such as those.
Yeah.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
So I'm going to flip it. I mean, this program, we really focus on the folks that serve growers, right? We don't typically talk directly to growers, though we do have folks that farm on the side, board members of co-ops that are listening in. So I'm going to go outside my normal lane here for a moment, but I want to think about this a little bit more deeply from the perspective of the grower. So we've talked about some of the historical resistance, the skepticism, some of the things that have created an unwillingness to maybe be the first adopter on some of these things, right? Real or perceived. That is the reluctance is there. So I'm a producer and I'm hearing this conversation and saying, wow, okay, so all the people that are competing for my business are now, my information has effectively become commoditized and everybody has access to it and they can trade on it. They can make decisions based on it. It sounds like I'm losing some of my leverage. At the same time, as much as you commented at the start of the show, Katherine, that we're in a very heavily fragmented industry, it'll never be more fragmented than it is right now, and it's more and more consolidated every single day. So they're saying I'm seeing fewer and fewer places to sell my production locally every day. I'm not seeing a meaningful increase in places where I can buy my inputs season to season. So if I take as fact that my data will be anonymized, I am going to be protected. I'm going to be treated with respect of a B2B transaction, and I am not the product. What is the benefit for me as a grower? I'm only going to put grain on a truck and move it so far for delivery. I'm only going to buy a certain range of products, and I either need to go pick it up for cash and carry, or I need to hire an applicator who's going to be local. So since the sell side and the buy side for me is relatively concentrated, what is interacting with this type of platform look like for me, and what's maybe let's tease out the benefits a little bit for the grower.
Yeah, let me take that first, and Katherine, you chime in with anything I miss. Ultimately, everything that we're seeking to serve up to individual agribusinesses, we'd also serve up to growers. So the intelligence on basically what is like yield looking like, within my jar area or other jar areas would be also available to growers. And so that we can be able to provide for growers that kind of intelligence that they need to be able to know when to sell, how to hedge, all those kinds of factors. Secondly, I see like significant opportunity in the long run for growers to begin to achieve price benefits from ultimately providing data in spaces. And so a good example is we have like a sustainability line where we are offering growers ultimately a premium on grain sold in return for them attesting to various sustainability practices they have. We do that both through a USDA program. We also do it through our grain discovery traceability product, where it's primarily used in the food grade soybean space. And so those kinds of things, like there's always kind of this view, I guess, that growers are going to get harmed by sharing data. Well, I get it. And so if we're going to give growers and agribusiness complete control over the rights of how their data is shared, we have to be able to come up with a value proposition that makes it worthwhile for them to share in some way. And so the simplest cases I can come up with is like, let's sit down and brainstorm all the ways in which we can get a better price for a farmer because they are ultimately sharing data about their practices with some sort of buyer. And so, there's like a lot of other ways that we're brainstorming on that, but those are kind of some simple use cases.
That's great.
I think that captures it well.
Okay, so let's shift a bit. One of the things I think is kind of interesting about this is ag tech is too broad of a brush to paint on any one particular thing. It's always kind of confusing how that became a unified sort of segment within agriculture, because you have automation, you have software, you have now intelligence, you have sensors, there's so many different legs within that. But one of the big ways that one of the big success cases of ag tech over the last, say, decade has been those businesses, those innovators that have found a way to digitize workflows, where it has created a digital process that reflects the real world process. Things like scale tickets, for example, notorious for getting lost. It's like a habit. I'm just going to store this piece of paper on the dashboard of the vehicle where all the windows are open all the time, and I'm going 50 miles an hour down the road. What could go wrong, right? Contract settlement, ordering inputs, making payments to retailers, position management, right? It all came down to being radically better or finding radically better ways to execute a legacy process in a digital environment. And that was great. There was huge unlock there. But we're actually talking about something, a very different kind of use case here, in that, and these are my words, maybe you disagree with this characterization, but it's like it's the intelligence layer on top of how you make decisions, not how you manage transactions. My question for you all then is, what are you seeing, or how do you support your partners in industry to get them to change the ways they work? Because we know it's hard to get people to just use a system that effectively does the same steps of what they've done for 20 years, just does it on a screen instead of in a notebook. That was hard. And that should have been easy. Now we're saying you have a partner in the machine that is going to help you make decisions differently around how you look at your origination strategies, your trading and merchandising activities, your procurement, your supply chain planning, infinite number of different use cases. What are the early signals you guys are seeing around how is the resistance to actually adopting this? Are people quick to adopt it? Yeah, just general observations, because a lot of folks listening might be really excited about this, but they've also thought, man, it's really hard to get my people to just use a lot of the systems we've invested in historically.
So first of all, thank you for the way you called out what I would call Ag Tech 1.0, basically digitizing workflows. And to be clear, I don't think I've been clear enough in this podcast on this point. There are a lot of other companies that do that. That's not really what we're not aspiring to do that. What we're aspiring to do by way of Ag Hub, and what is Ag Hub, is connecting all those data sets to provide this integrated intelligence. We are largely at 98% not going to be in the digitizing workflows business. We are going to be in the integrated intelligence. The pain point I hear over and over is I got 20 screens. They don't talk to each other. I need somebody to help solve that problem. And so when you ask the question, what is going to be the breakthrough? What's going to be the unlock to for a customer or prospective customer to want to get on TTN Ag Hub? That's one of them. That's a big one. It's not going to happen overnight, but the goal here is to go from 20 tabs in the browser to something a whole lot more manageable. One would be great, but I'll go for 10. Second thing that we hear a lot of from agribusinesses on both sides, both the upstream side and the downstream side, is that we are asking more and more and more of our sales agronomists or of our originators. Instead of having, 50 farmers, they have 100 to now manage. And so therefore, if that's going to be the reality, if that's their business reality and their operational reality, then simply put, they need something that helps them, go from just sawed-off shotgun approach, call a bunch of farmers at random, to being able to get the highest ROI farmers that they should be contacting every day. So literally, the point that I hear over and over and over is, I need to move the call list from 100 farmers to 10. Give me 10 farmers to really focus on contacting every day. Now, the part that we get friction on of our vision is that we believe that ultimately Ag Hub, particularly on the downstream side, can help with pricing. If you provide a sense of what total supply is going to be coming in at a draw area level, you can do that way better, because we've moved beyond the age of just needing a WASD report and looking out the window to determine what the supply is in an area. We can ultimately help set basis better. Now, the pushback on that is that gets into the real secret sauce, the thing that these companies most pride themselves on. And so that's one that I'm not going to fight on necessarily up front. If I can just solve the problem of who are the 10 farmers to call in today to get a better ROI for my operations, and great. Then over time, hopefully we can prove we also can help them on the basis setting side of the business too.
And then I think just adding on to that, like really being able to make those decisions around your pricing and all of that, really that comes from having good data elsewhere. So from being able to have a CRM that you're using effectively and you have all of this data in there, having an ERP that you're using effectively, those things that have really digitized your workflows, that creates like potentially a tremendous amount of data exhaust. That exhaust can ultimately be used to fuel these decisions and to make much smarter decisions. So that's really what our goal is and how we try to help people think about it, of like, let's take all of that data that you already have and make it actually useful so you can make decisions at scale versus right now making decisions that, like Gray was saying, instead of having to do things 1 to 100, just give me the 10 things that I should be doing right now.
Yeah, it's something I want to call it that you guys have both been hinting at, and I think we should make it explicit. And correct me if I'm wrong here. I mean, this digitized workflow, which replicating or digitizing the transactions versus digitizing decisions, there's an accumulated value. You kind of need both of them, honestly, from my perspective. So I imagine the prospects. So you come up with this digital exhaust, Katherine, which I love that metaphor of sort of capturing the off-gassing of your standard work. I think the prospects for someone to fully leverage the value of something like Ag Hub is going to be diminished if they are working in a paper and pencil business right now, right? Because you level up your localized ability to differentiate based on your ability to quickly aggregate your own information, leverage information through Ag Hub, know what the historical patterns are, make those decisions and act. I think my guess is that if you're not using an ERP, if you run your business solely on spreadsheets, which is better than nothing, but solely on spreadsheets, and nothing with a report factory, nothing with an automatic real-time update on open position versus, farmer-owned bushels in storage versus, the to arrive, et cetera. If you don't have that quickly available, you're going to be somewhat hamstrung in how much, not that you wouldn't get any value from Ag Hub, but it's only going to be less than a digitally enabled co-op that has already made those moves to move on to a platform like those that we're talking about here today. Is that fair?
I would say that that's fair. And it's where we've tried to meet customers where they are, knowing that we kind of have to meet customers in different places. So the way that we viewed it is like, what can we do to allow for some basic integrations of, okay, you can upload a CSV of data if you have your customers in a Excel spreadsheet instead of in a CRM, but then also allowing for customers with a CRM to be able to integrate that as well. So I think it's a mix of like, we know that companies sometimes have various levels of digital adoption. So what can we do to meet companies where they are and be flexible with that and make it so that the tools are still valuable, but they do really have the most value if you have a full integrated digital ecosystem.
Let me just also say thank you guys for letting me be sort of the skeptic, the in-house skeptic on staff here. I'm trying to also channel some of the things that I hear during the breaks, during board meetings, or at industry conferences after someone gives a presentation, and the things that I hear from our client base and our partners. So trying to channel their ideas, their questions here to get the response to kind of enrich the discussion. Now, this is actually my personal, not maybe a skepticism, but sort of something that kind of gives me pause. And I'm going to play on your, again, going back to this Nielsen reference point that you made earlier, Gray. Nielsen, as many of us know it, are the boxes that used to sit on the back of TVs and sort of monitor who was watching what channel at what time. And it's the way that people, the network TV knew what was resonating with audiences, what was getting a lot of viewers, and they could then in turn, I presume that information was sold back to the networks and they could use it to decide what they were going to charge for advertising slots. Must-see TV in the 90s and 2000s on NBC, for example. My observation is maybe that as we aggregate information like that, who's watching what, I don't necessarily know in the network TV context that it has led to a lot of differentiated content. Like everybody has their reality TV franchise, Big Brother or Survivor or whatever. Everyone has their hospital drama. right? Some of them have been going for 20 plus years. They're trying to find that magic in a bottle with a sitcom that can run for 5, 10, 15 seasons. And so it's kind of commoditized a lot of the content. Now, maybe that's not fair. No, we don't watch network TV in my house, just streaming, but that's what I recall. Is there a risk, generally speaking, that a solution like Ag Hub to the marketplace and the intelligence it generates just accelerates the commoditization of the industry? We already operate on pretty, notoriously narrow margins, whether you're a producer, an ag retailer, a co-op, a private grain handler, whatever it is. This widespread data availability, it's going to unlock a lot of value for individual market participants on the front end. But as you get those full network effects and those scale economies, and you've actually got this huge pool of users, does it compete all those margins to nearly zero over time because the ubiquity of the information and it's just available to everybody? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I may be way off base there, but that's something I just kind of wonder, is there actually a long-term value destruction component that maybe is inevitable, but we need to be thinking about?
I think that, first of all, what Ag Hub ultimately gets to of sort of going beyond, for example, the WASD report to provide, for example, better yield analysis or better dryer supply analysis, that kind of stuff is inevitable. I mean, the democratization of information is like this sort of secular trend that transcends industries that's been going on now, I guess, throughout human history. And so I don't know that DTN has control over that. If it's not us, I'm confident will be somebody else. Secondly, if that's like what happens when we just like beat the merchants out of the business, then we're not going to have customers, or they're going to be paying a lot less to us. So that's not going to be an advantageous outcome for DTN. So what to do about that? I guess I've observed a couple of things. One, what we are seeking to do is just to provide better transparency so that if you're an agribusiness seeking to engage a farmer, you're going to the right farmer that creates the most sort of value add opportunity, however you want to define that. What I know about creating like value add, what I know about if you connect the right buyer and the right seller, that's like really what your business is. And that's it. In the end, like what we're seeking to do here, you create the most surplus. You create the widest spread in between the two reservation prices. And so if that's what we're doing, we're creating the widest spread between the reservation prices, then we're not beating margin out of the business. And so let me give you an example that sort of harkens back to something I said 20 minutes ago, is that I tend to believe in the big scheme of things. And again, this is maybe a belief, but it's rooted in what I observe how the secular changes are taking place in agriculture and in the supply chain is that may change from White House to White House, but generally speaking, we are headed towards a world in which there is more demand for traceability. Maybe not perfect traceability, but more. And just food grade soybeans. I mean, LCFS, 45Z, those are what the impacts of those regulations are occurring now in the Trump administration, is that we are now requiring not just food grade producers, but plain Jane old commodity producers of soybeans and corn to be able to demonstrate XYZ about their practices. So we can show what is the CI score of this corn. Because if I'm procuring corn for ethanol that I'm selling into California, then I have to be able to demonstrate that it has a CI of a certain level. If I want to be able to be eligible for, 45Z tax credits, and they are huge, they're huge, then I have to be able to demonstrate XYZ practices. And so we're headed into this world, and that's just like, one micro example of like what's happening right now in an environment that you would think that would be like, very like against all this traceability tree hugger stuff. We are headed, I think, inevitably into a world where there will be more and more premium to what I would call data enhanced bushels. And that provides premium value for both the producers and for the downstream buyers to share. It is like the small step in us going from office coffee to Starbucks coffee.
Well, as someone who prefers office coffee, that last part didn't resonate. I'm just kidding. I think that's a very fair pushback or counterpoint, if you will, Gray, because I think as you're talking, I realized the premise of my observation is that the underlying business is not changing, right? That everyone's trying to sell number 2 yellow corn, trying to get away with as much yellow 3 in there as you can, blend it off. And for God's sakes, don't sell any number 1 and number 2 values. But what you're pointing to is actually the business is becoming much more complex, which is creating opportunities. And this actually allows you to capture those opportunities. And so that's a fair point. Katherine, as we wrap up, anything to add to that, or anything we didn't cover today you think is really relevant and meaningful for the growers, if they're listening, as well as the agribusiness operators that are certainly tuning in?
Yeah, I guess just building on what Gray is saying, I think like it's interesting how much it feels like over those last few years, those opportunities are new opportunities that will come up of like right now it's LCFS, 45Z. Like we don't know what it will be a year from now, 2 years from now. We don't know what will happen with trade policies or anything like that will potentially completely change dynamics again. So I think it's an interesting time to be in ag tech and to think about like, how can we really create solutions that will make it so that navigating this uncertainty, people feel like they can actually do it with confidence and have the right information for it and like take advantage of the uncertainty versus just kind of have to exist with it. So I think it's been an exciting time to kind of think through how we can really partner both with farmers, but also with agribusinesses on what can we do to help reduce that uncertainty.
And I think it's a great message to leave it on, not just trying to capitalize on the uncertainty rather than just surviving amidst it. So Katherine and Gray, I want to thank you both for taking the time to join us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
And to our listeners, of course, I appreciate you being part of the Pacesetter Pod community and taking the time to listen in and consider ways to turn strategy into outcomes in your agribusiness. We've certainly given you a lot to think about today. Look forward to your comments and feedback and further discussions. I appreciate you joining, and we look forward to having you next time right here on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is the podcastfactory.com.